The coffee had gone cold before I even noticed I was still holding it. I remember standing at the floor-to-ceiling window of the Meridian Club's private dining room, watching the Sydney Harbor lights blur into long golden streaks through the glass, and thinking that a man with 38 years in commercial property development should feel something other than hollow when he closes the biggest deal of his career. The contract sitting on the table behind me was worth $4.6 million. My hands, the same hands that had poured concrete footings on a freezing July morning in 1988, when I was 22 years old and had nothing but a borrowed ute and a determination that bordered on stupidity. Those hands were trembling slightly as I held the cup. I told myself it was the air conditioning. My name is Gerald Whitmore. I am 60 years old. I have built more of this city than most people will ever know. And on that particular Thursday evening in March, I was being celebrated by people who had never once asked how I was actually doing. My business partner of 22 years, Alan Drummond, was laughing too loudly at something the solicitor had said. The champagne was the good kind. The kind you only open when the number on the page has enough zeros to make your accountant go quiet for a moment. I should have been happy. I turned back toward the table, and that is when the world stopped making the sense it had made for the previous 60 years of my life. She came through the service entrance from the kitchen, carrying a tray of bread rolls and a small ceramic dish of whipped butter. She moved slowly, not the practiced efficiency of the other waitstaff, but the careful, deliberate movement of someone managing a weight that no cotton uniform apron was designed to accommodate. 7 months, maybe closer to 8. The pregnancy was impossible to miss, and yet it was not the pregnancy that made my breath leave my body all at once. It was her face. Clara Osei was the daughter-in-law my son had told me 11 months ago, had packed a bag while he was at work and simply left. No note, he said. No phone call. She had cleaned out their joint account, he told me, wiping his eyes at my kitchen table while I made him tea and believed every single word coming out of his mouth. She had gone back to her family in Adelaide, he said, and she wanted no contact. He had shown me screenshots of a text message that he claimed she sent. I had grieved the loss of her in my own quiet way, because Clara had been the kind of person who remembered that I took 2 sugars, who rang me on my birthday before my own son did, who sat with me for 3 hours at the hospital when I had my cardiac scare 2 years ago and never once made me feel like a burden. She had not gone to Adelaide. She was carrying a tray of bread rolls in a restaurant I was sitting in. And when she looked up and saw me, the tray tilted dangerously, and every single color drained from her face, as though someone had pulled a plug. I stood up. She turned and walked quickly back toward the kitchen, as quickly as a woman 8 months pregnant can walk, and I heard the tray connect with a counter somewhere beyond the swinging doors, and then there was only the sound of Alan saying my name twice as I crossed the dining room without a word to him or anyone else. The kitchen was hot and loud and smelled of roasting garlic and industrial dishwashing liquid. A young chef called something at me, and I ignored him. I saw her in the far corner near the dry storage, her back against the wall and one hand pressed flat against her stomach, breathing in a way that told me she was trying very hard not to cry in a room full of strangers. "Clara," I said. I kept my voice low. "I am not here to hurt you, love. I need you to look at me." She did look at me, and what I saw in her eyes was something I have spent the months since trying to find the right word for. It was not just fear. It was the exhausted, bone-deep wariness of someone who has learned that every person who once felt safe has the potential to become dangerous. She looked at me like I was a door she could not tell was locked from the inside or the outside. "Does he know you're here?" she whispered. "He does not," I said. "I am here because Alan chose this restaurant, not me." "Clara, my son told me you left. He told me 11 months ago that you were gone." She made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob and pressed her fingers harder against her stomach. A gesture that I have since come to understand was not distress but instinct. protection. Mr. Whitmore, she said. And then she stopped. She looked around the kitchen. She looked at the doors. She looked back at me, and I watched her make a decision. He didn't tell you I left, she said quietly. He made sure I had nowhere to stay until I had no choice but to go. I want you to understand what it means to be a man who has spent nearly 4 decades solving structural problems. When a building shows a crack, you trace it. You do not patch the surface and call it finished. You find the original point of failure and you work backward from there. I am not a man who flinches from what he finds. But what Clara told me in the next 4 minutes, standing in the corner of that kitchen while the dinner service continued around us and steam rose from the industrial sink in great white clouds, cracked something in me that no amount of engineering experience had ever prepared me for. She did not leave. She was removed. My son's name is Dominic. He is 34 years old. He has my height and his mother's eyes, and a charm that I spent years mistaking for character. Clara and Dominic had been married for 3 years when she fell pregnant. She described the first months as difficult but manageable, the kind of early adjustment that any couple navigates. But by the time she was 12 weeks along, a woman named Renata Slade had appeared. Dominic introduced her as a colleague from the investment firm where he worked. Renata began appearing at their home in Leichhardt with the frequency and ease of someone who considered herself already at home there. Clara told me, her voice never rising above a murmur that I had to lean in to catch, that she came home one afternoon to find Renata in their kitchen making dinner as though she lived there, and when she asked Dominic about it later, he told her she was being irrational, hormonal, that she was misreading a professional friendship. He said it so calmly, so reasonably, that Clara spent the next week wondering whether he was right. That is how it starts, she said. You stop trusting what you see with your own eyes because someone you love tells you your eyes are wrong. I held the edge of the stainless steel bench and did not say anything, because there was nothing adequate to say. By the 5th month, Renata was there 4 nights a week. By the 6th, Clara had been moved out of the main bedroom on the grounds that her restlessness was affecting Dominic's sleep before important work presentations. She was in the spare room while Renata sat on the couch watching television with my son as though Clara was a housemate they were politely tolerating rather than a pregnant wife in her own home. Mr. Whitmore, Clara said, looking at me with a steadiness that cost her something. He told me if I tried to get any legal help, he would make sure everyone knew I was unstable. He had already told your sister, your friends. He'd been building the story for months before he asked me to go. He asked you to leave, I said. The words felt ugly in my mouth. He packed a bag for me, she said simply. He said there was enough in the account for a bus ticket and 3 weeks in a motel. He said if I came back, or if I contacted his family, he would tell everyone I'd been stealing from the household accounts, and he'd already moved the money to make it look that way. I asked her how long she had been working at this restaurant. 6 months, she said. The manager here, Philippa, she gave me shifts when nobody else would. She's been decent. I looked at her, at the shadows beneath her eyes, and the way her uniform sat too loose across her shoulders, despite the fullness of her belly. And I understood that my son had not simply ended a marriage. He had attempted to erase a person. I took my coat off and put it around her before she could flinch away, and this time she let me. We are leaving this kitchen, I told her. You are not going back to wherever you have been staying tonight. And you are not going to be alone for another hour of this pregnancy, if I have anything to say about it. She started to argue, and I held up one hand. I know I am the last person you expected to see tonight, I said. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I want you to think about whether staying here and hoping my son never walks through that front door is actually the safer option. She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, he comes in sometimes. On Friday nights, he sits at the bar with Renata, and I have to stay in the kitchen until they leave. I called my driver, Kevin, from the service exit. I left Alan at the table with the champagne and the $4.6 million contract and a voicemail that said, I had a family emergency, which was the most accurate thing I had said all evening. Kevin pulled the car around to the delivery lane at the back of the building without asking questions. He has been with me for 11 years, and he understands that when my voice drops to a certain register, questions can wait. Clara was shaking in the back seat, and it was not the cold, though the March evening had a bite to it. I gave her my jacket properly this time, and turned the seat heating on, and told Kevin to take us to the Palisade on the north side, where I keep a serviced apartment for interstate clients. It was serviced and stocked, and more importantly, Dominic did not know it existed. I want to make sure you know what kind of woman Clara Osei is, because it matters to the rest of this story. She is a structural engineer by training. She had been working freelance before the pregnancy, reviewing residential builds for compliance issues, because Dominic had asked her not to take a full-time role with any firm on the grounds that the hours would be too stressful. She had agreed. She is also the kind of person who, even while being systematically dismantled by the man she had trusted, had been quietly documenting everything. She had a small black notebook in the pocket of her work apron. Dates, times, direct quotes, transactions. She had not told anyone because she had no one to tell. But she had written it down every single day for 11 months because somewhere underneath the exhaustion and the terror, Clara Osei still believed that the truth was worth preserving, even when nobody was looking. I read that notebook sitting in the armchair of the Palisade apartment while she slept properly for what she later told me was the first time in months. I read it, and I sat with the weight of it for a long time. My son had not just driven his wife out of their home. He had been siphoning money from a joint investment property we co-owned, a small commercial tenancy in Newtown that I had put in both our names when Dominic turned 30 as a gesture of faith in his future. The rent from that property went into an account I had not checked in over a year. Clara's notebook had the figures. $82,000. Moved in 12 transactions across 8 months to an account she had traced through the body corporate correspondence to a holding company registered in Renata Slade's name. He had stolen from me using the trust I had given him as the mechanism. I contacted my solicitor, Patricia Fennell, at 7 the following morning. Patricia has the manner of someone's favorite aunt and the professional instincts of a barrister who has seen every variety of human dishonesty and stopped being surprised by it sometime in the early 2000s. I told her what I had found. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Gerald, I am going to need the notebook, a copy of the title documents, and access to your bank records for the past 14 months. I will have them to you by noon," I said. "Do not speak to your son until we have the full picture," she said. I mean that. I did not speak to my son. I spent the next 4 days doing something I have always been good at, which is building from the ground up while nobody is watching. I engaged a forensic accountant named Stuart Birch, a quiet, methodical man from Parramatta who had the distinguishing quality of never once reacting emotionally to anything he uncovered, no matter how ugly it was. Stuart traced the $82,000 and then kept going. The investment property had been refinanced 9 months prior. There was a second mortgage that I had not authorized, arranged using a digital signature on a document I had no memory of signing. Stuart looked at the metadata on the document file and told me, with the same tone he might use to discuss the weather, that the signature had been applied from a device registered to Dominic's home address at 2 in the morning on a Tuesday while I was, according to my own phone records, asleep in my house in Hunter's Hill. My son had forged my signature on a refinancing document to extract $140,000 from a property I had given him in good faith. I am 60 years old. I have had business partners try to cut me out of projects. I have had contractors take money and disappear. I have had a competitor spend 2 years trying to undermine my firm's reputation with council planners. I have never once, in 60 years, had to sit across from evidence that the person I had worked to give every possible advantage had decided that the fastest way to what he wanted was to steal it from the hand that was still open. Patricia called me on the 4th day. She had been in contact with a financial crimes detective at the New South Wales Police, a woman named Sergeant Vivian Cow, who had agreed to review the documentation before any formal complaint was lodged. "Gerald," Patricia said, "there is enough here for fraud charges and potentially more. But I want to talk to you about timing, because your daughter-in-law's situation has to be protected in this." Clara was not a complication in the legal strategy. She was the reason there was a legal strategy at all. Without her notebook, without 11 months of documentation that she had maintained with the discipline of someone who had decided that hope was worth the effort of keeping records, we would have had suspicions and no map. I told Patricia that whatever happened next, Clara's position had to be secured first. She agreed. We spent the following morning with Clara in Patricia's office in the city, and I watched Clara walk Patricia through the notebook with the calm precision of a structural engineer presenting a compliance report. She did not cry. She did not editorialize. She laid out the timeline, the figures, the dates, and the direct quotes she had preserved. At the end, Patricia put down her pen. "Clara," she said, "you have just done the prosecution's work for them." Clara looked at me. "I told you she'd be good," I said. For the first time since I had found her in that kitchen, Clara smiled. It was a small, careful smile, the kind that hasn't quite decided yet whether it's safe to be a real one. But it was there. The baby was due in 6 weeks. I had Clara moved, under Patricia's guidance, to a secure short-stay arrangement that left no paper trail connecting her to me or to any address Dominic would know to look for. I paid the cost without being asked. It was not charity. It was what any decent person does when they have the means to prevent harm and the evidence that harm is coming if they don't. I want to tell you about the trap, because it is important that you understand. I did not set it out of anger. I set it because my son was not going to stop, and the only way to ensure Clara and the baby were permanently safe was to remove his capacity to threaten them. Anger is not a foundation. It is a weather event. What I built instead was a structure. I contacted Dominic and told him I wanted to meet. I kept my voice exactly the way it has always been with him. Steady, a little tired, the way a 60-year-old man who has been working hard for a long time tends to sound. I told him I wanted to discuss the Newtown property and think through what to do with it now that Clara was gone. I told him I was feeling my age and that I had been thinking about simplifying my holdings. He arrived at my Hunters Hill office at 11 on a Wednesday morning, looking relaxed and wearing a jacket I knew cost more than Clara's weekly wage at the restaurant. He sat down across from my desk and said it was good to see me looking better. I said, "I want to understand what happened with your marriage, Dominic. I want to hear it from you." He told me the same story he had told me 11 months ago. Clara had become unstable during the pregnancy. She had been erratic, withdrawn, difficult. He had tried to support her, but she had decided to leave. He was devastated, he said, and he was managing as best he could. I listened to all of it. I did not react. Then I opened the folder on my desk and slid it across to him. "That is the forensic accounting report on the Newtown property," I said. "The second mortgage, the refinancing document, the metadata from the forged signature, and the transaction records showing where the money went. All $140,000 of it." He looked at the papers the way someone looks at a sudden drop in a road they thought was flat. "Dad," he said, "I also have Clara's documentation," I said. "All 11 months of it. Sergeant Ko at the Financial Crimes Unit has reviewed the full package. You have until Friday morning to present yourself voluntarily. Patricia Fennell will be present, and she will advise you on your options, of which there are not many." He tried 3 different approaches in the next 4 minutes. The first was denial. The second was that he could explain the financial transactions if I gave him time. The third was an appeal to what he called our relationship, which I found the hardest to sit through. Not because it moved me, but because some part of me had loved the version of him I used to believe existed. "What about my child?" he said finally. "Clara will keep me from my own child. The birth certificate will list the father as unknown," I told him. "You can pursue paternity rights through the family court like any other person, with the full weight of your financial history available as context for the court to consider." He sat very still. "I want you to know," I said, "that I spent a week trying to find a version of this that preserved something between us. I could not find one, because you did not leave me any material to work with." He left without saying another word. Patricia called me 2 hours later to tell me he had presented himself to Sergeant Keogh's office with a private solicitor and was cooperating with the investigation. I sat in my office for a long time after that phone call. The harbor was doing what it always does in the late afternoon, turning a color that has no adequate name. I thought about the first time I took Dominic to a building site, when he was about 7 years old and he kept picking up bolts and putting them in his jacket pockets because he liked the weight of them. I thought about the night his mother died, when he was 26, and he sat on the kitchen floor, and I sat next to him, and we did not say anything for a long time, and that was enough. I thought about all the things that had been real before they weren't. Grief does not only happen at funerals. Clara went into labor at 4 in the morning on a Wednesday, 5 weeks earlier than the due date, in the short-stay apartment that no one knew about, and the hospital staff, who had been pre-briefed by Patricia's office, were ready. I drove there myself because Kevin was visiting family in Newcastle, and I did not want anyone else in that car. I sat in the waiting area of the maternity ward at Royal North Shore and drank bad coffee and did not think about the contract or the fraud investigation or the 42 years I had spent making something I was proud of. I thought only about the woman behind those doors, who had walked into the worst year of her life and come out of it still keeping records, still hoping, still moving forward with whatever she had left. At 6:47 in the morning, Dr. Anne-Marie Costello, a measured, unhurried woman who had clearly seen everything and remained compassionate anyway, came through the doors and found me standing up before she had taken 2 steps toward me. She said, "Mr. Whitmore, you have a granddaughter." She was small and loud and had a grip like she was already practicing for something important. I held her in the crook of my arm while Clara slept, and I felt the kind of clarity that does not come from strategy or evidence or legal frameworks. It comes from 640 grams of fingers and the particular weight of someone who has decided to be here. I named her, Clara had said to me, the week before, Nadia. It means hope in some languages. I looked down at Nadia and thought that was exactly right. In the months that followed, the fraud case moved through its processes with the methodical pace of institutions that do not hurry for anyone. Dominic was charged with document fraud, misappropriation of jointly held assets, and one additional charge relating to a third financial matter that Stuart Birch uncovered during the extended audit, a matter I will not detail here, because it involves people beyond my family who deserve their privacy. He was sentenced to 4 years with a non-parole period of 22 months. He did not look at me during the sentencing. I was not looking for him to. Renata Slade was charged separately for her role in the holding company arrangements and pled guilty to a reduced charge. She is someone else's problem now. I had the Newtown property transferred out of both our names and into a trust for Nadia, managed by Patricia until she is 25. The rent from that property will pay for whatever she decides her life needs to be. It is not a fortune. It is a foundation, which in my experience is the more important thing. Clara is now the principal structural compliance officer at a mid-sized residential development firm in Piermont, a role she began when Nadia was 4 months old, and which she has already expanded beyond its original scope because that is the kind of person she is. She and Nadia live in Balmain, in a terrace house with a fig tree in the back garden and a front door that Clara painted a particular shade of green because she said she wanted it to look like it was glad to see you. I visit on Sunday mornings. I bring the good coffee because the stuff Clara makes is optimistic at best. Nadia is 8 months old now, and she holds onto my thumb with the same determination she had at 6:47 on that Wednesday morning in the maternity ward, and I think every time that she did not get that from me, and she did not get it from her father, she got it from her mother. I am not going to tell you what to do with your own family because I did not listen when it mattered most, and that disqualifies me from giving advice without first telling you the cost of the lesson. What I can tell you is what I know now that I did not know then. I knew my son was charming. I did not ask often enough whether he was honest. Those are not the same quality, and I treated them as though they were, and that error compounded for 34 years until it became a disaster that a pregnant woman in a restaurant apron had to absorb alone because I was not paying the right kind of attention. Pay the right kind of attention. Not to what people say in the moments you are watching, to what they do in the moments they think you're not. The other thing I know is that loyalty can be faked and trust can be manufactured. But there is a specific quality in the people who keep records in the dark, who write down the truth in a small black notebook even when they have no reason to believe anyone will ever read it, who keep going when going costs them everything and yields nothing visible. That quality is rare, and it is worth more than any contract I have ever signed. When someone shows you that quality, protect it. It is not common, and it is the only thing, in my experience, that keeps a family from becoming simply an address where people once lived. The fig tree in Clara's back garden is going to be enormous in 10 years. Nadia is going to climb it. I intend to be sitting in the garden when she does, drinking Clara's optimistic coffee and pretending it's fine. Because some things you endure because the people you love made them. That is the truth of it. That is all of it. That is enough.